2024 Equity and Anti-Racism Subcommittee meeting. It is 7 o'clock, so we're going to get started. I am Abby Rubin. I'm one of the co-chairs. Shana Kalish is also joining us via Zoom. She's also one of the co-chairs. And in attendance, we have Sarah Thomas. And anyone else who pops in through Zoom will I guess, introduce them as well. And I'm going to hand this over to Ms. Megan Schaefer.
Thank you and welcome everyone. It's good to see you. Lots of familiar faces. And this is the first meeting for the Equity and Anti-Racism Committee of the 24-25 school year. And we've, over the last at least year, committee has met approximately quarterly. And in the off months, it's been typically the communications committee. So just orienting people that are new here or just need a refresher, that's where we are in our yearly agenda of committee meetings. So for this evening, I thought we've had some conversation internally and certainly over the course of the board meetings that we've had this year and in committees that we've also hosted, such as our Committee to Address Race in Education. My goal is to try to thread some of our work and provide connections across those meetings because I get the opportunity to participate in all of those meetings. And hopefully, part of what we do tonight is just provide some education, some common understandings, and then share some goals and objectives that we have as an organization moving forward, particularly around the equity and anti-racism work that we do in the district. So to get started, I'm going to go through a presentation, and I know at the end there'll be an opportunity to have some dialogue, some questions, et cetera. So hopefully we can just get through the presentation, and then we'll have, I believe, plenty of time to do that as a community. So I'll start with some updates. I'm going to talk a little bit about what equity looks like at different levels. Equity work isn't new to Lower Merion, nor is it new to public education. And I've been asked a lot about not only equity work and what it is and trying to share examples of that and how everyone benefits from equity. There's also a lot of questions about, well, what does the accountability look like? How do we know it's working? What are those measures? So I want to start to break that down so we can, as a community, understand it a little bit better. And those metrics are complex because it's equity is about individualizing need. And so it's sort of, let's name what we're talking about and then look at those applicable metrics. So we're going to do a little bit of that tonight. But like I said, it's a very broad question and an answer at the same time. I've also received some questions about cultural proficiency teams. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that tonight just to give everyone an update about where that work is. And again, at the end, as I mentioned, one of the goals that I have is just being able to thread the work together and share with you upcoming opportunities to learn more about what we do and as it relates to equity and anti-racism. So to start, I always think for the first meeting of the year, it's helpful to start with what's the purpose of a committee. And in this case, this committee convened initially about 4 years ago, and it was an ad hoc committee. And the stated purpose is that this committee provides strategic input and feedback to the district's leadership team about processes enacted and steps taken to promote equitable experiences for all students and an anti-racist culture in the district. And further delineates that it's ensuring that all students are treated equitably and without bias based on race, gender, identity, sex, sexual orientation, socioeconomic class, religion, or disability. So I thought it's important just to start with that framing because again, that idea of like there's an allness, there's a identity that I think we can all appreciate and see reflected in what this work is intended to look like. So since we last met and again, the theme of connecting our work, more recently, starting at the end of last year and into the beginning of this year, we did some updating to our equity policy. And the reason I bring that up is because initially this committee did a lot of work in the development of the equity policy. I was there. And so I want to honor that this committee did a lot of that work. And since then, I don't think we did any, and I've represented this in the policy committee, I don't think the overhaul or not, I shouldn't say overhaul is the wrong word. The revisions that we made changed the intent of it at all. In fact, I think it enhanced it, and I'll share why I think that. And it's connected to state guidance that's been issued since that policy was initially enacted by the district. So what I want to demystify as well is that Lower Merion isn't alone in having a belief around equity and a policy around equity, that the state now recommends that districts have policies around equity. And when I say the state, I'm generally referring to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And so the reference guidance that's noted there, the Pennsylvania Equity and Inclusion Toolkit, is where we were able to pull updated definitions from to replace or put into our policy. So instead of the original terms, which were our intent to build common language, now we know that we have language that the Pennsylvania Department of Education recognizes in the equity field as language we should all embrace. We would move forward to adopt most of those defined terms. And so that was the most substantive change that was made in that process, but I wanted to bring it to your attention here if you hadn't been following the policy work. And also just that reference to the Pennsylvania Equity and Inclusion Toolkit is another reference document that we use internally, and as a community, it might be of interest to you to check out. Also, this particular document, and I tried to include the full link in spelled out on these slides. So if you wanted to go back and pull it and find this resource yourself, because I realize there's a lot of words on this page, but this is another resource that is provided by the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and why I think it's helpful, not just because it's one page, and I'm a big fan of a one-page document, but it also attempts to kind of talk about what we hear are perceptions around equity work and provide some clarity so that there's more common understanding. For example, we do hear the concern that equity, inclusion, and belonging is another way of promoting critical race theory. The Pennsylvania Department of Education, to which we are aligned, clarifies that that's not part of what is taught in any state-required curriculum, nor is what it is taught in Lower Merion School District. So again, this resource is a way to help us frame the work that's consistent with the guidance we receive from the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and so I offer that to the community as well as a common resource for all of us. Another one of the updates from Pennsylvania Department of Education is the culturally relevant and sustaining education competencies. And it's something we've talked about or referred to, but we haven't really, I don't believe, publicly taken a deep dive into what this is, but certainly it's work that we've already begun within the school district, which are essential requirements that are now mandated for schools in terms of professional development for staff. So this is already embedded into the Pennsylvania Code, and so the reference to the code there is the definition of culturally relevant and sustaining education, which is education that ensures equity for all students and seeks to eliminate systemic institutional, racial, and cultural barriers that inhibit the success of all students in this Commonwealth, particularly those who have been historically underrepresented. And so that's embedded in the code, Pennsylvania Code, and also something that as a district we are required to implement in service of our students and education for our staff. The competencies are broken down into a few areas. 9 of them, and I'll just give you a little bit of a preview. So within that competency, there's a standard and there are competencies that we are, again, required as a district to ensure that we're giving our staff that professional learning aligned to those competencies. So that's a starting point relative to what the state mandates look like and the changes that we've made recently. And it leads into, or it's going to lead into, because that's the next slide, a little bit of what I would say a bigger picture look at equity in public education. And from the standpoint of that equity and accountability piece, I wanted to give some examples of where it's been embedded in our work for a long period of time. And it's embedded in legal requirements for the district. And so moving through these next slides, what you'll see is a general description of what I'm framing as mandated equity, whether that be a legal requirement or something that's issued by a higher authority. And then the next slide, the slide 2 that accompanies it, is a breakdown of what some examples of what that mandated requirement looks like, as well as the accountability standards and the data reporting. Again, my point here is because I get the question a lot of what's the accountability measure. These are just some examples of where the district is held accountable for work that's in service of equity goals. So many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is a federal law that's designed to support students with disabilities, ensuring that they receive a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. So these are guarantees for students with disabilities that that all public school districts are required to follow. And what I think in this moment, for me, was important to just call out is this recognition that as a country, we agreed in the past that students who had needs related to a disability, that it was okay for public schools to invest more in supporting those students. That's a measure of equity. And we, again, as a country, agreed that was a good thing to do, and we continue to do that. And so what you see here, which probably you can't read, and I'm really sorry about that, but it is available to you. The idea of some of those measures include designing individual education programs, IEPs. You've probably heard that term before, which is a requirement for students eligible students with disabilities to design a program that meets their needs in a least restrictive environment. And those are defined terms that we all understand and appreciate and endeavor to meet in programming for our students. There are procedural safeguards, meaning there's ways in which parents engage and support the work and are invited to the table, and there are ways in which parents have advocacy rights within the process that we must honor. And so there are requirements that we have to follow to ensure that we are doing that. And I say those things and in the generalist of terms to give that context to the idea that we also, aligned with those things, have reporting requirements that go to the federal and state level that say, are we meeting those standards in terms of timelines? Are we meeting those standards in terms of making sure that students are accessing their education in the least restrictive environment, et cetera? So we are bound to provide data to the state. There are reporting functions that we have relative to investigations or compliance measures, compliance activities that we have to do that address and that accountability measure. This is work that we do behind the scenes largely, but often the data is also publicly available or can be publicly available depending on the sensitivity of that particular data. But it's not done in a vacuum. It's not done without accountability. This is just one example of where equity and accountability are connected, and there's work that the district does in service of that. Another example in my mind of equity at a level that we've embraced and long embraced, which is supporting students and families through free and reduced meal programs. And that's a federal program. It's also a state program. And, you know, again, we believed as a country that many years ago that it was important for students to have access to lunches, food, in order to access education at a higher level. And so that's been in place for a long time, and connected to it are eligibility standards and processes that we follow and data that we provide to the state relative to our compliance with those eligibility requirements. And also, I often get this question, not necessarily equity, but there are nutrition standards that are attached to these programs, and sometimes people don't like those as much, but it's important that I think that we talk about it holistically. There are programs that are designed to support students. The district has long supported students through these programs, and there are these accountability standards that we must follow in order to allow and ensure that our students continue to have access to those programs. Title I is another federal program through the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which sometimes, which is targeted to schools with high percentage of students from low-income families. We have 3 schools within our district that are identified as Title I schools, and that gives us access to certain resources, financial resources, that may be earmarked for certain programming and supports for students. And again, the why behind this was identified as a way in which we provide equity to our students at a national level based on perceived and real differences in outcomes for students who are coming from families that are designated as low income. Again, the scenario is the same. There's benefits that are derived directly and given to students because of programs like this, and there are also accountability standards relative to the district and the use of those funds and outcomes as a result of use of those funds. Any one of these topics could be a special, you know, we can highlight at another meeting, and the point is, there are a number of these programs that benefit our students. Title III is another funding source for students who are English language learners, you know, in order to support those students' needs that are identified to access curriculum and schools in this country. There's funds that are earmarked for that, and together with that, again, there are opportunities that benefit students. There are accountability measures and outcomes that are tied to those programs. I'm going to jump ahead because you get the picture, I'm pretty sure at this point. The one other one that I wanted to mention is that the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act is another federal program that provides assistance, and it's also connected to mandates because as a country, we believe that there are investments that we make in students in order for them to access our public schools in a way that's equitable. So talked a little bit about what's happening at the state level, talked about our continued commitment to our equity work, and I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive in a similar fashion to what I just went through with the federal obligations. So first, I wanted to note that our policies align with those federal requirements. So policy and AR 114, which is individual student supports and services, is aligned with the IDEA. Policy and AR 257, which is the Title IX parent-family engagement, is aligned with the requirements of Title I, et cetera. So we have policies that are aligned with those federal requirements. And in some places, the district has extended the impact of some of those federal programs, such as the free and reduced lunch program. So the policy AR 152, participation in curricular programs and activities by economically disadvantaged students, takes the concept of these students that are identified as eligible for free and reduced meals, also may benefit, receive benefits in this district that enable them access to things such as not having to pay for field trips, or not having to pay for a yearbook, or not having to pay for other things that we believe are fundamental to their access to education. That wasn't what the program at the federal level was designed to do, but that's what this district decided was also important, and so that's reflected in our policy. So that's a way that we've extended equity work into our policy. And then there are some areas that I think have the themes of these, the theme of equity, but aren't mandated extensions at this time, although they're recommended. So as I mentioned before, the policy 101, our equity policy, is recommended by the State Department of Education, but it's not required. And we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into how we look at equity and goals and outcomes here. Our policy in AR on transgender and gender diverse students isn't a required policy, but it's one that we believe is in the best interest of students and their access to education in Lower Merion School District. So I wanted to try to break down how we think of equity goals in our district and some examples of strategy and outcome. So the goal within the policy, the equity policy, is one of the goals is to reduce and, where possible, eliminate barriers on behalf of students, employees, or families who may have historically experienced opportunity or achievement gaps due to factors such as race, color, ethnicity, national origin, language, immigration status, socioeconomic status, sex assigned at birth, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, disability, creed, or religion. And then it goes on to say, in light of those of social and historical context, and within what the law permits, the board authorizes the superintendent or their designee to develop and promulgate regulations designed to ensure that structural impediments are reviewed and reformed in service of meeting the needs of those historically marginalized individuals. So this is saying, the policy is calling for the superintendent or designee to create administrative regulations, which we've done. So I'm categorizing one of those strategies and just pulling from the administrative regulation, which states, the district shall provide resources, materials, and assessments that reflect the diversity of the district's students and that are geared toward the understanding and appreciation of individual cultural uniqueness and differences. So within that standard in our administrative regulation, there was a questioning protocol that was established for the purpose of reviewing course resources and instructional materials. So we have a protocol that we've used and continue to use when we're evaluating curricular resources and new programs that is intended to allow us to ensure that what we're selecting as a resource is culturally relevant, and that we're approaching it from the standpoint is it reflective of our community, our students' identity reflected in those materials. And so where would you see evidence of that? We do this, probably the most likely place you're going to see evidence of it is when we bring to the curriculum committee new curriculum products or a textbook. You'll hear us present, or you should, and if you don't, you should ask us this question. here's what we did when we evaluated it. Here are the questions. Here's the protocol we went through. Here's why we believe that this is a resource that is, culturally responsive and is in line with the administrative regulation around equity. So that's how you would see it in action. Also, for example, we engaged Education Northwest to do an audit and equity scan a few years ago. One of the areas of focus for them was curricular materials, instructional practices, and pedagogy. And so there's a report that in addition to using the protocol, we had an outside consultant come in and evaluate how we do it, how we're doing it, and provide some recommendations, which is a measure of sort of our work to date and a pathway for future growth. So there's accountability because we've brought it on ourselves to hold ourselves accountable through an outside consultant. We bring it publicly to say, here's how we vet materials, and we are open to conversation about how we do that in the best way possible and in service of our equity policy. Are there different ways we could measure that? Sure. I'm just giving you some examples of how we do it and how we try to be transparent in that work. Another goal, and I'm not going to read the goal again because it's the same one, but I'm going to pull out a different administrative regulation as a strategy, a component of the regulation as a strategy, which states that the district shall ensure the promotion and maintenance of welcoming and inclusive school environments. In service of creating such an environment, school-based discipline shall be equitably administered based on a model of restorative practices rather than punitive measures when appropriate. To this end, the district has invested in training trainers, and as of June 2024, all professional staff have been trained in restorative practices. Restorative practices has also been embedded into our codes of conduct, into our handbooks, and also into our referral system, our discipline referral system. So it's a checkbox. Have you engaged in these restorative practices connected to, a potential infraction? Backing up, I don't want to simplify restorative practices because it does get pigeonholed into this idea of like it's only about discipline. It's not. Restorative practices are about building community, but for the purposes of this example, I just share that it is embedded in ways that make our practices better and more aligned with the intent of the equity policy. That measurement, again, is that and I could have pointed this out earlier, but in some of the federal and state reporting requirements is that we report discipline events to the state and federal government. So publicly, that information is available to you. It's information that we look at regularly, and our goal is that we are reducing those types of discipline incidents or consequences, and at the same time see a rise in restorative practices in support of all of our students. Again, I want to be clear though, restorative practices is not a substitute for discipline. It's intended to be the education and restorative component of the work. This, though, is what I intended to show you, that there's accountability at the state and federal level around that data. It's data that we look at, and we've embedded those restorative practices within the training that we've done and also in the procedures that we follow. And then the final goal that I wanted to highlight today, again, any of these we can take a deeper dive into, and this one in particular we will at the curriculum committee in December. The administrative regulation on this particular strategy is that the district shall maintain high academic standards and expectations for every student and provide multiple pathways to success in order to support the achievement of every student based on their individual needs. To meet these objectives, so there's a list of things. One of the ways to meet this objective is the following practices and procedures shall continue or shall be established. Collecting and revisiting student achievement data through district and building-based data protocols and platforms. So that's one of the many strategies listed in the administrative regulation. So to this end, the district has continued to invest in enhancing our data practices and interventions at all levels through data teams, through professional learning communities, our multi-tiered systems of support, and a more robust and user-friendly data warehousing and analytics tool. And that's why that linkage is there. One of the things that we've heard from other districts, and the reason we're moving in this direction is that this is a tool that's going to empower not only district administrators to be engaged with the data, but is a really user-friendly tool for staff. And that's why we're really diving into how do we use it in real time with our staff and our students to look at data and address needs at the individual child level, because that's where we know the needle moves first. Is what are we doing with individual students and needs in the classroom in accordance with, and sort of in service ultimately of changing the way that we're seeing gaps. So there are ways that we attack it at a systems level, and there are ways that we need to attack it at an individual level. And having systems in place like this allow us to do that with a lot more precision. And as I mentioned, this is the data piece, the data practices and achievement data is something we're going to be talking about at the curriculum committee of the board on December 2nd. And I'll remind everyone at the end about that. And then I think more generally, and why equity matters to me, to us as a district, and the way we've understood and interpreted it since I've been working under the equity policy, is that it's for everyone, and it's for everyone. Because someone isn't necessarily seeing themselves as a beneficiary of a particular part of equity, the intent is that everyone benefits from the outcome. So representation, for example, is important for all students. It's not just about who's represented there, but who else is represented there. If it's not me, who is it and why? And that's important that all students see that. So I think the idea of equity being like, what is someone else getting that I'm not, that equity is, in practice, at its best, is benefiting everyone. It's universal design. The other topic that I'm going to talk about, and then I know we'll have time to turn it back over to for some questions about this, is cultural proficiency teams, and it's also connected to our equity work, but it also predated our equity policy. We've talked about this publicly and the work that cultural proficiency teams have done. All of our schools have a cultural proficiency team, and they are made up of staff, and they're designed to support staff and students within the school building. Most schools have had a team like that for over a decade, and they typically meet 1 to 2 times per month. These teams focus on equity and closing opportunity gaps for underrepresented populations. A key area of work for many teams is the promotion of belonging for all students, staff, and families. And I gave some examples of what that work looks like, because it's not all, everyone does the same thing. It's not cookie cutter, but it's largely aligned. For example, at some point, a team may be doing a book study while another team is working on some lesson plans. And so what you see are some examples of that represent the work that they typically do in service of students within their school community, students and staff when they're within their school community. So they may be ensuring representation within their school buildings, display cases, cultural heritage night, daily greetings in languages spoken in students' homes. So that group is supporting the work in the buildings in that fashion. This, again, in the future, we may be able to bring some of those teams in, or some representatives from those teams, to give some better examples and kind of breathe life into this. But because I've received some questions, and I know there are some questions in the community about those teams, I thought this was a nice opportunity, because it connects to our equity work, to put in a plug for their work and represent what they do here. So I think that I can take a pause, and we can discuss any questions you have.
Sure.
Right.
Sarah, do you have any questions? No? Okay. I want to commend you. Thank you so much for this presentation. I think this is, it kind of struck, had a finger on the nerve in a sense that these are the kinds of questions that I had been hearing so much throughout the community, from parents as well as, people just in the, taxpayers. Everybody was sort of like, what is happening here? So thank you very, very much. You anticipated a lot of my questions because I had written down MTSS, link it, and then you talked about that. But just to, if you don't mind expanding a little bit more on that, because I think in the service of being holistic and how the district works. So, there are conversations that happen in the curriculum committees or in finance, in facilities, and they all, it's all in service of student learning. And so how does Link It work? How does that not just, how does it work and how does MTSS work? What are those things, if you can do that sort of somewhat briefly, so that it's a bit more holistic of an approach? That's possible.
No, that's a great question, and I'm probably not going to do it justice. And in fact, we know how significant that is, and we want to spend some time at the curriculum committee to talk about how does that look in practice, et cetera. So there's a couple that they connect, but they're different in terms of operation. So multi-tiered systems of support is something we've talked about over the last few years, and is really building into a process where the idea is empowering and ensuring our teachers feel empowered in the classroom to provide interventions at an appropriate level. So what we call tier 1 interventions is like a toolkit that we believe all of our teachers should have and be able to intervene with students, whether they're students who are identified or students that are English language learners. It's a universal toolkit that all teachers should feel equipped to use to intervene with students at the classroom level, whether it be to address a behavior, to address they're struggling with learning a particular concept. I'm trying to give some examples simplistically, but, and therefore, what we're going to do at a tier 1 level is that the teacher is going to engage with the student and address the student. And that's equity work, because it may mean that student's getting something a little bit different inside the classroom than all of the other students because they identified a need for support. So that's simple equity work in the classroom. Then there are other tiers. So there's a tier 2, and that means that something that those interventions, that toolkit of interventions that the teacher has at the classroom level may not be working, and they may need to with a larger team address that in a different way. And so we typically think of tier 2 interventions where we need to bring additional team members in, and that may be reading support, math support, that may look like a lot of different things, but again, very simplistically, it's taking that intervention outside of the classroom and seeking additional support. And then tier 3 support is the highest level of support, and that may be, a student that is identified and has an individualized education plan. So it's a higher level of support and intervention that is documented, that has legal weight to it in many cases. So there's a tiered approach, and it's all in service of equity and getting what a student needs. So what we want to do is really do that at the highest level, because what we don't want to see is where there were opportunities to use tools in the toolkit at the first level in the classroom, and those don't get used, and then the student gets referred or identified because the right tools were never used or tried. That's what MTSS does, is commit our system to a structure that has to be followed in service of equity for all students, and also in service of consistency and fairness for all students. So done well, and it is a program that takes 3 to 5 years to fully implement, and those goals of making sure kids get what they need, but also making sure that kids are also getting what they need and aren't referred for higher levels of service that they don't need. Or, which is when we talk about overrepresentation in special education, et cetera. MTSS is one of those interventions that's intended to reduce that type of overrepresentation. And then link it is sort of like the companion to that work so that we can use data in ways that at a teacher level, at a school level, at a district level, it just gives us better analytics. And it's not just limited to, that one-time test score. It's intended to also incorporate behavior and other information that we think gives us the better picture of the whole child as opposed to, this one-off situation and provide better and more precise intervention. So I hope that, and I'm sure so stay tuned. Next month, it'll probably be a much better explanation, but that's hopefully that for this purpose works.
No, that does. And it's MTSS's multi-tiered systems of support. I didn't know what MTSS was when I had heard it the first time, so I'm just sharing that out. Another question that I have, you referenced the Northwest study. That was 21, I think, 2021?
Yeah.
Is there a plan for an update, kind of a check-in to see how we're doing? Will there be a different organization involved? How does that work? 23, excuse me.
Yeah, I think they started their work in 22, 23, and the reports came out in, I think, 2023. I think there's always opportunity to decide what we want to take a critical look at and invite someone in to do that work. So I would say that that's something we should always be assessing is what needs some examination from an outside perspective. And it kind of goes back to what do we want to measure? What matters to us that we need to take a critical look at? Because that investment is real. Like it's not it can be expensive, time-wise and financially. But I think that is something we continue to look at is to say where do we need to get that feedback? Because we do get feedback from the state and federal government, but having another lens that gives us a little more precision and robust feedback is important. So I don't have an answer of exactly the next step there, but I think it's always important, and always as a district, we have been consistently engaged with that type of feedback loop.
I'm sorry.
Can I jump in now, Abby?
Sorry, Shanna. Go ahead.
I can't hear you now that I'm talking. Oh, no.
Yes, please
Yes,
join
go
us.
ahead.
Sorry.
Okay. I didn't have a ton in the way of questions. I just had a couple comments that I wanted to add in. To piggyback on the conversation about MTSS, if anybody is interested in really the nitty-gritty of how that works, we got a really great presentation in the curriculum committee that I chaired that last year, I believe, from Dr. Gaudioso that really goes into the how that's implemented. I believe we're in year 3 of a 3-year implementation program plan for that. So we're really starting to get our feet under us on that. So that is, I appreciate the overlap on that. And I wanted to also thank you, Megan, for your work on the equity policy. And I also wanted to give public thanks to all of the folks in the community that were part of that process, because it was a very big, involved process with community members, with staff members, to get that done. And I believe when we did it, we were the 5th district in the state of Pennsylvania out of 500 plus school districts to do it. So I've always been really proud to serve on this committee and really proud to be a part of that work and to put it forward. And the last that I can't remember what this was apropos of, but I think it's fitting to say and fitting of what you put in there is that the point of equity is that it benefits every kid, that its support isn't like a pie, that if I take my piece, there's one fewer piece for you. That I really appreciate that we're trying to just draw more support for every kid, to get every kid what they need, and to just continue to expand that to the number of kids and to the extent of each kid that we're reaching. I really liked that presentation. It sort of felt like going to a mall and getting the "this is the land and you are here" kind of thing. So I really hope the community also appreciates all the background and current happenings we've got. So that's what I've got. Thank you.
Yes, I second that. Sarah has written, so we're a motley crew right now. We're all sick in some form. I'm going to share Sarah's question because she doesn't have a voice. So this is regarding Link It. Knowing that it's very new to us, what data are we typically tracking in it? And this might be also too much in the weeds, considering this is more curriculum discussion, but if you can touch on some of those, I think that would be helpful.
So beyond the state achievement data, yeah. So I'd really prefer to defer the data, but the intent is that it's a robust data warehouse. So it wouldn't just be achievement, those state testing data points. The intent is for it to be able to house our, local assessments as well as other data points that we believe matter to determining what a student needs at any given time. So that's sort of, is that good? I mean, are you looking for a particular? Exactly. So yeah, I can restate that the system, which includes, I'd also say it's Link It and Swiss. That's coming in to bring some of the behavior data together for us, and attendance data is a part of that. So when we think about usually at a level 2 intervention or tier 2 intervention, what's happening with a student? What do we want to know in terms of, are we seeing, from an attendance standpoint, are we seeing a student miss a lot of classes in first period? Is that a trend that we need to notice? Well, we do have a rotating schedule here, so that's a little bit different. But attendance tends to be a significant data point. If students missing a lot of school, what do we need to put in place to ensure, or why is that happening? The behavior data is relevant to, behavior is a form of communication. A student's telling us something if they're not engaged with what's happening in a classroom, and that deserves a lot of questions from us, like, why is that happening? What's going on? So that's why we think all of that information is really critical to have really robust conversations about what does a student need, as opposed to looking at a single data point. So yeah, the idea is this is a system that gives us that sort of more powerful opportunity to look at a student at an individual level. So, yeah.
I think at this point, we'll open it up to the community for questions. Do we have any in person? Ms. LaPera?
Oh, okay.
And if I can just jump in for 1 minute, for the folks on the Zoom, if you have a comment or question you'd like to have read, please include your full name and where you live in the district. Thank you.
And if you'd like to speak while you're here in person, there is a sign-in sheet. You can just similarly put your full name and your neighborhood, just your, if it's Wynwood, if it's Ardmore.
You can just leave it at the podium when you come up, write your name and. Okay. And then state it as you say. Hi, Adrian Seltzer, Wynwood. I want to thank Shana for kind of explaining something that I think is missed in all the words. Equity is not a zero-sum game. And I feel that a lot of people feel it is. I'm a little disappointed this isn't like the other anti-racism meetings we've had in the past, because it's just you speaking at us instead of you hearing from us. And I'm glad I'm not in school anymore, because I was almost asleep through this. And you talk about data points. Well, your data points don't mean anything if you're not, I know, Megan, you met with Alex and a couple other people who came up with the community action plan from the NAACP Mainline Branch, Mainline Box Lunch and a Book, and Power Mainline. But the school board is the governing part of this whole thing. Your administration, school board is governance. So as much as you might not like it, if we do not have the school board thank you. If we do not have the school board on track with this, then it's not going to happen. CARE's been around 20 years. If you were actually making some progress, it wouldn't still be here. If these, all this stuff and all this data was making any difference, the group wouldn't have needed to do this 13-page thing. So there's a lot of words, but what is the action? And I will drop this off. I'm not being attacking. Thank you.
I wasn't sure if you were going to reply or if I can, no.
I will. If you don't, sure. If you don't mind if I take a minute. I hear your frustration. I hear what you're saying. I will say there's no resistance, at least I'll speak for myself. There's no resistance at all to any of what we're talking about. I have only asked questions around I've only asked basically the same things you have, which is how are we moving the needle? How do we measure ourselves and our efforts to show that we're accomplishing what we want to? There's no resistance at all. I completely agree with what you're saying. I believe it as well, that we need to, the idea that there is any kind of resistance or resistance is the only word I can come up with right now, but there's none of that as far as I can say. I do think that, this is gonna sound like an excuse, but it's really not intended to be. This is a slow-moving body in terms of the district. It's a behemoth. And so implementing some of these efforts, like, for example, I know that we've talked a lot about MTSS and Link It in the past, few minutes, but those, I think, are pretty important interventions and pretty important efforts to really capture where the needs are. Because in a global sense, we know that there are needs, but the only way to really address what that is to have a kind of a clarified goal and say, this is the problem, not there is a problem. We all agree, I think, that there is a problem, but we need to be able to, approach it and address it in a more targeted way. So
You have to approach it in a more successful way.
I agree with you, 100%. I've had multiple conversations over the past, at this point, many months, echoing, and it's the exact same thing. Why have we had why has this effort been in place for this long? Why has, as someone's, I don't mean to take all your time, I'm sorry, but as someone said at one of the board meetings back in September, they had moved here, I think it was 10 years ago, and it was the same story 10 years ago as it is today. I have the same question. So these things are, I understand that it wasn't the most enthralling for you, but for me, I have to say, I thought this presentation gave a lot of important background because we talk often, or I should say I talk often, about this, and I need to know a little bit of the boring details to understand how it actually works in motion. And I do think that, this is a helpful painting of the picture, because while this meeting itself, has a different culture than it may have, I think that the intention hasn't changed and won't change. The approaches, though, I do think should change if what we've tried hasn't worked, or, if we don't have a success to share yet, we should try something else. I think pragmatism has a role. So I hear your frustration. I have the same frustration. I'll speak only for myself in saying, but I don't think I'm only speaking for myself. There's no resistance to doing this. I think it's just sort of trying different things to see what's going to be the most effective.
Read the report, please.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Florence Montplaisir. I am in Villanova, and this is actually my first meeting, so it's all new to me, but I thank you for your presentation and sharing the content of particularly when thinking of equity. For me, my particular concern relates to the culture and climate of the school when it comes to treating students of color in an equitable way. The experience of my daughter, which I know is not unique, is one of harassment, microaggressions that she's encountering from other students. And it's been really hard to address in a systemic way because those events seems to happen often, and not only to her, but other students of color. But there's not enough documentation to sort of, build a clear pattern. And it's been very challenging. And so I was very encouraged to see that there is language out there around treatment, equitable treatment of students. But I would push the committee to, and I'm glad that you're thinking of curricula, et cetera, but I would push the committee to also think of the culture and climate that students have to navigate on a daily basis. And particularly thinking of the measures and accountability processes that can be put in place. Because I think a lot of the measures that you have relate to disability learning, et cetera, but it's hard for students to learn in an environment where they're targeted all the time and where they don't feel welcome, seen, valued, or respected. And I think addressing just the educational portion without addressing the environment, I think I'm just joining, the other person who was here before me. I don't think we can move the needle much without addressing the environment. And so I think, I really wanted to sort of share this and hope that, we can work together on creating a culture where students can be accountable if they are not respectful to others. My experience has been that teachers usually have a blind eye to those practices. And so I'm really hoping that you can embed in your training, particularly, I think you mentioned the cultural teams, or I think you have different processes in place, but other than, sharing culture, I think teachers really need to be empowered with toolkits to know how to respond on the spot when they observe microaggressions instead of turning a blind eye, because it creates a lot of damage at the student level. Thank you.
Can you repeat your name? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Florence Montplaisir.
Florence.
Montplaisir.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, and I'm sorry that's been your child's experience. And I'd like, if you have time afterwards, to talk a little bit more so I can see if I can support in any way. Your points, though, about culture and climate and how students feel, I mean, that's a part of the equity work that we do. I didn't highlight that today, but certainly there's always opportunities for growth if that's been your experience, and I'm sorry. But we do believe that unless a student feels safe, they're not going to access their education at the same level. So that's fundamental to what we need to do. And training around microaggressions, we have done that with our staff, and we will continue. And that's actually part of the culturally relevant and sustaining education standards, that microaggression piece. So know that that's like, we recognize that as an important competency that our staff needs to have. So, but I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards. Thanks.
Good evening, Ruth Jenkins from Wynwood. My concern, I've spoken to you about this before, is the equity of the curriculum. that there are students who do well in one program but not in another. And sometimes you have a prerequisite in order to get into chemistry, you have to take biology, or in order to get into geometry, you have to take algebra. And it seems to me that they can be individual programs, and that if a student does well doesn't do well in biology, they are locked out of moving forward in the curriculum, going into more advanced classes when they probably are very capable of doing that. Same with some of the English classes and history classes. And they can actually pass through and not take a prerequisite and do better in another class that's at a higher level. And I think that if we would address that in the classroom, we wouldn't have so much of a gap in the achievement, because sometimes students are just closed out of a class that they could do very well in and wind up in a class that they don't do well in. So I'd like to see a little bit more flexibility in the prerequisites for students. Thank you.
I don't see a pen here. Thank you.
Somebody must have grabbed it.
No problem.
I think Ruth has it.
Thank you.
That's right, you can keep that one there.
Good evening. My name is Andrea Gosfield, Penn Valley. I'm not only a parent, but I'm also an advocate. And one concern that I have was mentioned, and I think we need to think more deeply about culture, climate, and microaggressions, not only amongst students, but of staff and administration. I have 4 children, one of which has already graduated and went from 2nd grade through the high school and is now in college. I have 3 others who are at the elementary and middle school level. I have seen many microaggressions and biased practices amongst the staff and administration in the district. So my question is, how is that behavior being tracked? And training is wonderful, but if you have staff that are repeat offenders in terms of showing microaggressions and biases toward our student population and toward our parent communities and families, how is the district addressing that? Because we can talk a lot about microaggressions, and I think it's important to address that, but I feel like no one tends to call out or advocate for when a student is being injured by staff or administration. So that's one question. Another has to do with Linkit, just because it is fairly new and I don't have a lot of information, but my concern, and I'd like to get clarification, is that if all staff and admin have access to certain data, and that data includes absences, and that data includes attendance, and that data includes behavioral issues, can that data then be weaponized against a student? So I'll give an example. I have a middle schooler at Welsh Valley. If she has a bad day in science and it gets tracked and linked it, will another teacher have access to that and form an opinion on her based on what they're seeing in that database? And so I wonder what the district is doing to make sure that bias is not unwittingly being promoted through these new systems.
I can answer both of those questions. I didn't know if you had another one, so do you want me to go ahead?
No, that's good.
Okay, so on the first one, in terms of accountability for staff that are engaging in inappropriate behavior over a period of time, then it should be just, there are consequences for that. We go through a progressive discipline procedure, depending on what the infraction is. It could be, just like a student, you could be suspended, et cetera. It could be a part of a performance improvement plan. It sort of depends on what happened, but the expectation is if a student is harmed by a staff member, there has to be a consequence to that, and there's a process that's followed to do that. And if that's not happening, or if people have concerns about that, then that should be escalated either to the principal, to our director of human resources, or to the office of the superintendent. relative to the concern or questions about how data is used. And that's something we've had a lot of conversation about because we too believe that that's important data to manage and ensure that only those that need access have access. So at a given time, we've set up sort of data walls so that the data that doesn't need to be shared, such as discipline data or et cetera, is shared with anyone that has access to the system. It's locked down in terms of, for the exact point that you raised is we want every student to have the opportunity to walk into the classroom and not worry that, oh, someone saw what happened, a minute ago. Those, within the context of a particular day, that might be relevant and important for all staff to know, but we have been we are intentional about how we give access to student data because of that exact reason.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Kent Cook. I live in Wynwood. In 2020, then President Trump signed Executive Order M-2037, specifically directing his staff to identify all federal spending on diversity and inclusion training, ensure the training materials do not promote quote-unquote divisive concepts, remove terms like systemic racism, unconscious bias, intersectionality, critical race theory. And now, President-elect Trump, when he was on the campaign trail, promised to take federal funding from schools with curricula, books, or classes that address race, racism, gender, or sexuality. In light of the fact that the Republican Party now has a 53-seat majority in the Senate, has a majority in the House, and controls the executive branch, he won't have to sign an executive order. He can just get the legislation passed. First question is, how does that blow up the entire curriculum in your presentation? He specifically stated he will fine schools and fine school districts up to their entire federal allotment of funds for including such terms and having such programs. So conceptually, we know this is coming. How are we going to deal with it? It's not going to be good to bury our head in the sand and wait until the inevitable occurs. Second part is a suggestion that you put into the curriculum a course on the United States Constitution, landmark Supreme Court decisions, and federal law. Specifically, what American could complain about teaching the Constitution? Specifically, in the Constitution, the 3/5 clause, the fugitive slave clause, and the 20-year compromise that allowed a $10 per head excise tax on every enslaved person imported to the United States. Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857, Chief Justice Taney wrote, "No black person, whether slave nor free, is a citizen, and therefore has no standing to sue in federal court." That's pretty much why you have the 14th Amendment, which actually makes formerly enslaved people free. You can keep moving. 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, the Equal Pay Act of 1963, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Fair Housing Act of 1968, Loving versus Virginia, 67, Roe v. Wade, 73, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, 1992, Americans with Disabilities Act, 1990, Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire and Rubber, 2006, Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, 2009, Dobbs versus Jackson, 2022, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard, 2023, Students for Fair Admissions versus UNC, 2022. This hits a good 80% of it. I don't think you're going to lose funding for nutrition programs because that's in the Farm Bill. You understand how we make sausage in the United States Congress? The states in the breadbasket of the country are going to lose their aid if you don't get SNAP benefits and school breakfasts and school lunches. So that's not going to happen, right? You may survive the programs you have for economically disadvantaged families, but this race thing, the current administration, with its total control of the federal government, is coming for it, and we need to be prepared for it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we do have a lot to think about and consider as we move forward with the new administration. I hope you see that my presentation was aligned with that thinking, but in hearing your words, I should have partnered with you, and it probably would have been better for Adrian to listen to. But the reality is I appreciate that, and I think that's a lot of, we have a lot to consider as a district and as a board and a community around what's next and as it relates to what we believe in as a district and what maybe changes at a federal level. So I appreciate your comments.
Can I quickly respond to that as well? Sorry. I also wanted to say thank you for your comments and for your focus in helping to kind of paint this picture in a way that's very clear. I think one of the most important things to remind ourselves when we're thinking about how change might be coming down the pike is, you know, and this might sound a bit facetious, but it's not intended to, the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And if you do, and what we need to kind of continue to do is show up, be here, talk to one another, continue to raise the concerns that we do in the effort of achieving a goal. So that we can really kind of stay focused on the goal and not get distracted by some of the noise and some of the fear that does kind of bubble up when change like that can be coming down the pike. But thank you.
And I'd add, I agree with Abby, is that what we're going to do as a district is continue to align our work with what we believe and what we've set out today, and to the points that were made about we haven't done enough. We acknowledge that, and the ways that we're trying to hone in on and with more precision address the work at an individual level, which we believe is going to move the needle at group levels. So I want to add that reassurance is that I think that the administration is very clear that that's still our work here, and that's where we're going to stay focused for now. And I heard a term recently that I also like, is this idea of strategic abandonment. So if something's not working, where do we pause and reorient our focus so that we put our resources where it matters and where it moves the needle. So I agree with, we do want to maintain the temperature in a way that we keep focused on what our priorities are here locally.
Hi, my name's Ifatayo Humphrey. I live in Ardmore. I have a son in 11th grade over here at Lower Marion High School. And I just wanted to piggyback off of a comment that was made earlier about climate and culture and microaggressions. And I didn't want to just yell out at the moment, but you mentioned that there's training and things like that for the teachers as far as those kind of things. But what I think I don't know if this is in place, but I wanted to add that a lot of that is going on by students, and maybe a teacher's teaching a lesson or overhearing some comment. Maybe there needs to be a plan or for the teachers as far as how to respond to that, how to take that student that may be harassing someone in a microaggressive kind of conversation or situation, and then correct that behavior. Is there maybe, I don't know if there's a plan in place or a system in place for how to deal with those situations. It doesn't necessarily always have to be punitive, but there needs to be some kind of correction that the teacher puts in place where they let that student know that that's not okay and not acceptable behavior for in school, not just noticing, I saw that kid do this. Yeah, so it's definitely a big problem, and I do substitute in the school, and I feel like you can see these microaggressions. Maybe you don't notice them if it's not something you're aware of because you don't experience them, but if you have training on that, but how do you react? And me, I definitely am like, excuse me, can I talk to you for a second? Like, excuse me, I hear your conversation, because they think they're whispering, but you can hear the whole class most of the time. So anyway, yeah, I just wanted to piggyback off that.
Did you also sign in?
Yes, I did.
Okay, sure.
Can you repeat your name? I'm sorry, I missed it.
So I missed it too. Thank you.
We also have chats that Amy's going to read, so we're going to move on to the chats.
So bear with me because I have to scroll up and down between where people's names are and their comments in some cases. So this first one is from Ed Goldberg of Wynwood. Does LMSD have a formal school climate program? I think I'll read through them all and then you want to respond when we get through them, okay. Joanna Hawkins of Ardmore. Are parents or can parents be part of the school-based cultural proficiency teams? What about student involvement in the teams since the purpose is elevating student voice? I think family and student input would be beneficial to enhancing these teams. Michelle Vessel of Gladwin, thank you for sharing what is mandated and what our district has expanded on. Can you please share what steps, changes made, programs set up, curriculum changes, staff changes, class material changes, if any, that have been done or are in the works by the district based on the Education Northwest consultant review? Also from Ms. Vessel of Gladwin, you stated the school district hired the outside consultant and said it is important to do that, but you have not said what you are doing with the data. How much did we pay the outside consultant that years later we still have not used the data to make improvements? And if we have, what are they? Ms. Joanna Hawkins from Ardmore, is there a link to the presentation on MTSS for public view? And yes, that MTSS presentation, I'm adding this, was at the April 10th, 2023 Education Committee and supplementary regular board meeting. And so if you go on board docs and put in MTSS and then click on the April 10th, 2023 meeting, you'll be able to see that presentation. That's my aside, not a community comment. Another comment from Michelle Vessel of Gladwin. Have you done internal review of these programs, or do you have data to share with the community on how they are working? And if they are meeting our needs, can this be a presentation you can share with us in a future meeting? Oh, wait, and then there's one that came to my email, hold on. Michelle McGill of Ballackinwood. Implementing all of these policies and federal requirements has not put a dent in the achievement gap. We will never be able to close the achievement gap until we develop meaningful goals with obtainable measures that work toward desired outcomes while collecting data consistently. When will you present the data that outlines how many Black and brown children are in honors AP and the IB program? Why is this information not being presented to the community? Can the board request that this information be presented to the community? We need to know how many Black and brown children are in CP classes versus honors AP and IB. Confidentiality is not an issue because you are not attaching the names of students to the shared data. Megan, when can you share this data with the community? I believe this is the core issue in our district. Instead of spending $100,000 on 6 kids, perhaps you can use that money to hire tutors to support closing the achievement gap while supporting students in honors and AP classes. Going back to the Zoom, question from, another one from Ms. Vessel of Gladwin. If cultural, climate, harassment, and environment are a part of this, then I would expect anti-Semitism to be addressed too. And I believe that's all the comments for which we have full names and where folks live in the community.
All right, I'm hopefully going to be able to cover all of these. School climate program from the first commenter asked if we have school climate programs. We have in some of our schools what's called PBIS. Why am I? Thank you. I'm sorry. It's that hour. This and supports positive behavior interventions and intervention and supports is a evidence-based program to support students through positive behavior reinforcement. It's a school-wide initiative that we've piloted under the formal architecture of what PBIS is known to be. So we have some schools in that pilot mode. That said, all of our schools have climate programs that are designed to support positive behavior for our students. So it may look a little bit different. It may not be under the PBIS label, but they are PBIS-like practices in other schools. So we have examples of that, like expectations for students at Gladwin, for example. They're not a PBIS school, but they have a structure and positive behavior plan for students in their school. If that's what you're asking about, that's what I interpreted your question to be about school climate. So yes, but it isn't exactly the same in every building. They're not all PBIS schools, if you're familiar with that. There was a question about cultural proficiency teams, and those are staff teams. They have always been internal school staff-based teams. Most of our schools, to my knowledge, or all of our schools have entry points for family involvement, and I'd ask that if you're interested in being a part of the conversation or bringing that type of recommendation or question to direct it to your school principal. And there may be points of entry that are unique to a particular school. So I'd suggest that you start there. There were a few questions about Education Northwest and what changes have been made or what have we learned and done as a result of that investment. I don't have the time or the capacity to take a deep dive, but it's certainly, we can talk about it in terms of one of our committees, if that's a desire of the board to do a deeper dive into that particular what we called like a landscape scan in a particular area and bring to light some of the learnings and outcomes of that. We could certainly do that. MTSS presentation you mentioned. I'm not sure I captured accurately the question in that one, but I'll come back to it in a minute. The question about data, Michelle McGill, and breakdown by enrollment in different programs, and that's certainly something we can work with the board to provide in connection with a data presentation. So we will work with the CCOB committee to see when we can add that to take a look at and talk about goals and strategies around that. If the question about, to the extent we're doing training about culture, harassment, climate, that we're embedding anti-Semitism in that, and we are, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward. And I'm sorry, the one question that I wasn't sure about was related to an internal review of programs. I don't know that I captured that one. Did anyone? I'm sorry.
I think it was referring back to the Education Northwest scan. Have we, I guess, made changes based on that scan?
Yeah, so I would say broadly, yes. How I can connect that to the actual, we can we can come back and talk about the outcomes. And I think we have done that in prior presentations, and that may be what.
Yes, they just sent that
Denise
information to you.
scheduling Or signaling to me.
They were
But
done in March 29th of 2023 and also on May 8th of 2023.
Okay.
And they are in board docs.
The,
Curriculum?
Hold on, I'm just in the search mode, so let me just go in.
and I also know that
Curriculum
one of the.
in April,
Yeah,
yes.
one of the things that happened during that time period was that they were engaged with us for a while, and we asked for updates as we moved along, so we could begin to incorporate and update our programs and practices in sort of real time, even prior to the final delivery of their landscape scan. So there may have been some updates along the way as well, but we can package that and share it out.
You can also go back and actually view the meeting in the website. So if you have any trouble trying to find that and anybody wants to, you can certainly email me, Denise LaPere at the district, and I'll be happy to walk you through that. But the one was the the one was the curriculum meeting, and the other May one was the education committee meeting.
So the presentations will be available. The meeting videos of committee meetings are only available for a month. So the presentations remain in board docs for 7 years or something. One more question for Ms. McGill of Ballackinwood. She would like to know when exactly the data presentation will be.
It sounds like it's just one and done. The first more deep dive into our data will be December 2nd, correct? Yeah, and that will be immediately following the reorganization meeting, which shouldn't take very long. So we're thinking that 7:15. Yeah, so that's when we'll start, and that's again not like a one-time thing. We're intending to continue data conversations into the following meetings. That's correct, right, Sarah? You're right? Okay.
Answer the question.
I want to go back to.
CP class, the black and brown students.
Yes, I did. I'll just and I made up, obviously wasn't clear enough, but the question about looking at that data specifically around class placement, or whether it's CP, honors, IB, and the question of whether that data can be presented, and we'll work with the board, in particular, the curriculum committee, where we're presenting some data to figure out where we can bring that into the presentation as well. So we'll do this.
Do you want to come up and speak?
The reason I thought that it was important to talk about that additionally is because I think there needs to be, or there should be, because to encourage equality and to make sure that every student in our district is accessing all of the resources that are available, I think that there should be some maybe education for the families on the difference between those classes and why they're important and how they can affect those students getting into college. Because as a person who feels like I know about these things, it's so much different than when I was young and when I was going to high school and college, and that I didn't realize how important it was, and then had to have my son moved out of CP classes into honors and AP classes. And I don't think that information is being passed on effectively to everyone in the community. I feel like somehow there's a whole group of our community that knows about these things, and there's a group of us that maybe don't intrinsically know already. And maybe it's because of our past experiences or where we went to school, or I worked a lot at the time when my son was actually, we were out of the country the year he transitioned, so maybe I missed the meetings, but I feel like there needs to be some education as far as that for maybe all of the families, and maybe a little extra for maybe some of our families of people who are Black and brown, so, yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and ways in which we are not just engaging our students and accessing those opportunities, but making sure our families are involved, and we're doing that in ways that are not just a we have to think about multiple modalities when we communicate, and so that's something we continue to think about, but that's an excellent point. And I also wanted to go back to your other point about like student behaviors and making sure staff's intervening and have sort of the tools to intervene. It also reminded me of also the school climate question, which is the restorative practices is designed, as I said, not just to be like a discipline or like attached to consequences, but is intended to set a consistent framework for how we build community in our schools. And so we're still in that process. As I said, we just completed training all of our staff at the end of June of last year to make sure, and our continued attention of making sure we're embedding those practices in a positive way to create more positive culture within our learning communities. That's a goal of restorative practices. So we may not be seeing all of the evidence of that yet, but that was the intent of it. So there are things that we've worked to support our students and staff and creating more positive climates in our schools. And like I said, that's something we have to continue to take a look at and decide whether those investments are meeting that goal.
Hi. I just wanted to let people know, I am the Vice President of the NAACP Mainline Branch, and if any of you are interested in joining our Education Committee, we would love to have you. Also, just as an aside, this year 4 seats on the school board are up for election. So if anybody is interested in finding out more about that, I know that stuff too. Also, something I don't know is, didn't we have a DEI director? I haven't seen her in a while.
Yes,
Is she okay?
She's going to be returning to work soon, but she has been on a leave, and I've shared that publicly. But thank you for asking.
Okay, because I knew she was on leave, but it seems like it's been a really long time. Thank you.
Hi, Jill Altschuler, Marion Station. The overall theme of what I would like to say is communication. We have lots of great presentations. It is really hard to find them on board docs. If there's, you have to know which committee on which year and which month, and it's hard to find. Well, I mean, what would be much easier? Yeah, I know, but you don't know if there's something you don't know what you're even searching for. If we could be, for example, all of the curriculum committee meeting presentations on the website, like not board docs, but if there's somehow to link all of the committee meeting presentations by year or something, because board docs can be pretty confusing. I mean, if you don't know what report, that way you can like see a list, oh, that presentation was done, I'd like to know about that. If you don't know what you're looking for in board docs, you won't be able to find it. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so many times I don't make sense, and I know that. So, because I know we've done, disaggregated data presentations in the past, so, having them easily accessible to see and compare would be, I think, super helpful for lots of people. And then in terms of reporting out on all these different metrics and measures and just kind of being a little more, is it possible to be just proactive and put things out there so people don't have to necessarily send emails and ask about this, are we doing that, do we have a right to know, somehow, and I don't, for example, the restorative practices, how is that going? What schools have started really putting it into place? What successes have there been? What barriers are there? What's in the way? Instead of just saying we're doing it, and have people having to ask, how's it going? Is it working? You know, share the ups and the not so ups. Just helping, it makes the community feel more, a sense of belonging, for sure. So I guess that's basically it. Thanks.
I'll definitely get some thought to, especially when we are doing presentations on a particular topic, like I did today. If there were some that I had thought about referencing, I could have given those dates, embed them here. So at least as a initial step, we'll try to be a little more cognizant of what might be a prior, presentation that we did that we would be referencing, like something about restorative practices, and just at least as a short term, say that was presented on that date. So at least to be, try to be thoughtful about that. And I'd love to communicate more about things that celebrate work that we've done, like restorative practices. And so, opportunities to do that is what we do try to do that. And there's a lot to celebrate, there's a lot to talk about, and I know there's a lot of content on our website, and sometimes that gets lost, or a particular message gets lost, because there is a lot out there, but, yep, thank you for your thoughts.
Hi, Crystal Blunt, Ardmore. I want to talk about this parent's concerns about the microaggressions of her student. And given today's climate and what's going on in our world, I really think we need to focus some real attention to this issue, because it's not an issue that is new. CARE's been in place for 27 years in this district, and that's the Committee to Address Race in Education. She's not the only parent. There have been many parents before her. There'll be many parents that come after her, after this mic, that share those same experience about the Black and brown children that reside in these schools and their experiences. We did a film back in 2004 of Black and brown children, parents, and their experience in this district. As a parent myself, with 3 students that came through the district, as a student myself that came through this district, and as an employee that works in this district, I have no words. I'm sort of frustrated because we're having to have these same conversations over and over again about these issues. And I really want this board to be intentional about how you're going to support Black and brown children and their parents in this district, who are taxpayers as well. And I really think we need to, because of the climate in which we live in now and what's coming down the pike with the leader that we're going to have in the White House. I welcome that gentleman. I mean, he was excellent in asking you what you're going to do moving forward, because we already know what's coming down the pike. But how are you going to address these issues? How are you going to address the issues of the curriculum, where not just, Black and brown students, you have Native Americans, you have so many other groups of populations as well that needs to see themselves in the books, the curriculum as well. But just like this gentleman said, what are we going to do as a district? If you're talking about belonging, which is your, buzzword for, everyone belonging, then what are we really doing? Intentional, so that we don't have to stand by a mic and hear, once again, about the microaggressions that Black and brown children are feeling in this district. How they can't, be themselves. We almost have to check ourselves at the door before we walk into a building because we can't really be our authentic self. So we know how to, role play when we come into a building. So I need to know what we're going to do moving forward so these conversations are less. Since you have CARE, since you have a DI person, like what are we intentionally really doing to change? Because we code switch all day long, and we shouldn't really have to code switch.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to defer to Ms. Schaefer if there's any specifics to respond with. But it's not falling on deaf ears. As frustrating as I will say this if I can, as frustrating as it is to have to rehash, there's one thing that we all are, and there's really no question about it. And resilience is in the DNA of all of us here. And as horrible as it is to have to continue to address this, I would hope that we can keep that also, we can keep that in our thoughts, that we're getting through it, we're gonna get through it. And I'm sorry? I think we all walk in our own shoes. It's hard to know how anybody else is living, to be honest. But I just, in the effort of having, I wanted to respond because I heard you, and thank you.
I'll just respond to your comment, but also the comments of others related to the current environment, and also what is unimaginably frustrating about the fact that situations still occur in our schools. And I'm going to say one thing, and it's going to, and I don't want it, well, it's going to be taken the way you want to take it. Our environments aren't free of, I mean, we can't guarantee that they're bubbles and that nothing bad happens within those school walls. That would be a fallacy for me to say, like, everyone is going to feel protected every day of the week, at every moment in time, and feel safe and secure. That is our goal, and that's what we want every child to feel and experience. And when they don't, there are protocols in place, and protocols sound like such a, that's not the right word, but pathways. We hope that children feel connected to an adult to report something that happened to them, that they feel some sense of safety with an adult in a school environment. And that's one small goal that we have for all of our students, is that they feel connected to an adult where they feel safety in the school environment. And we continue to want to see growth in the area of creating and fostering positive school environments for all of our students through things like restorative practices, through common language and understanding about expectations, behavior, et cetera. The world we live in is ever more complex, ever more filled with opportunities for engagement in ways that aren't healthy or appropriate, and we're going to continue to work on combating those ways. I'm talking about devices, I'm talking about things that happen outside the classroom, outside of school walls, and we know that it's our job ultimately, and I think I speak for educators in this school system, and we're not all perfect, but we do care about kids. That's largely why we're here, and and we want to do the right thing for kids. And I hope, you know, through all of this, that people feel that at some level, and I'm sorry if you don't, but again, I believe largely educators get into the work because they care about kids, and we're going to continue to work with our community and families to address what's happening in real time and build better systems moving forward. So I think the idea about clarity about where we are is important, and taking away some of the noise. We do become a pretty distracted district at times with a lot of different priorities for a lot of good reasons. But I think it's helpful for the board and the leadership to say, and this is what we're going to focus on now, and make sure that the noise, and dial the noise down and put some clarity on and spotlight on where we want to move the needle. And I think that would be helpful for the entire organization to do that as a community. And I think that's what we're hearing. That's what I'm hearing from meetings like this. And so I think the next step is to make sure that we're orienting our work that way as well.
Do we have any other comments? Or in person either?
Andrea Gosfield, one more comment. So we talked about curriculum, which I think is really important, but I think we didn't really get into programs that are aimed at the community. We only touched upon that briefly, and families. For instance, there is like a Love and Logic parenting course that is offered by the district. I personally opted out of it because there were so many racist and culturally inappropriate examples and language in that particular program that it was offensive to me as a Black woman, as a Nigerian American, as an attorney. And I wondered, how can we even be offering that to our community? So I want to go back to something that Megan Schaefer said. Like, you mentioned that sometimes you have these protocols that you use to assess curriculum. I want to challenge the district and the board and the administrators and ask, what are you doing and what kind of rubric or protocol are you using in materials that are getting and being pushed out or offered to the families and the communities? Because that's, I think, equally as important.
Thank you for that feedback. I'll look into that. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
One more comment from Michelle Vessel of Gladwin. If there is still a large amount of microaggressions against Black and Brown students, FYI, that group includes Jewish students of color, and we have so many programs in place, training for teachers, and it would seem they aren't working. Just imagine how it feels to groups who do not have training for teachers. We need to do better, and we need to review what we have in place to make sure they are doing what they were set up to do.
I thank you, and I'll in terms of the training, as I understand the comment is that we want to make sure that it's comprehensive in terms of microaggressions and those that may be impacted by that type of behavior.
Okay, before we conclude, I just wanted to, Ms. Thomas made the good suggestion that just as a cursory sort of overview, if you look on the Making Practices Public part of the website, of the Lower Merion School District website, there is a standardized testing data tab, and if you click on that, it does have the PSSA's breakdown in terms of scores and race and you know, grades, and there are lots of different disaggregated ways to look at it. This is, I believe, from 23. Yeah, this is 2023. So just as to speak a bit to what Ms. Miguel had asked about as well, it's available on the website. So to wrap up this meeting, thank you all for being and for speaking here. The next meeting is TBD because we have a reorganization of the board meeting coming up on December 2nd, which is also the meeting, the same date as the curriculum meeting that we've been referring to with the data presentation upcoming. And it will be, oh, thank you. So the next meeting the next equity and anti-racism meeting, will be scheduled after that. So kind of stay tuned. In terms of upcoming meetings pertaining to this work, there's a CARE meeting on November 20th. Topics to include a brief overview of curricular work. It's at 4 p.m. and I believe is it in this room? Oh, I'm sorry, it's the library. I haven't been able to make one because of the time, but so that's coming up on the 20th, and then on the 2nd of December, there is the reorganization preceding the curriculum committee of the board. We're going to discuss data and data practices. Generally, it should be around 7:30, 7:15 that we dive into that. So with that, we will adjourn this meeting. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.